So the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, BSL, is driven by our focus on working towards an Australia free of poverty. And this work and this pilot directly connects us to this vision. We know how important the transition from school to work is. We also know that young people with disability are much less likely to have the opportunities and engagement that their non-disabled peers have. Only 49% of young people with disability between 15 and 24 are employed, compared to 64% of young people without disability. The Inclusive Pathways to Employment, or IPE pilot, provided direct support to young people with disability to work to improve these outcomes. BSL is committed to changing the systems that perpetuate and entrench poverty in our community. There is a broader ambition from IPE of creating systems that can enable and empower young people with disability to successfully transition from education to decent and meaningful work and be socially and economically included in their communities. And that comes from the theory of change for this pilot and for this work. With the generous participation of young people in the pilot, our delivery partner services, and those in the local networks that were built by our delivery partner services, we've learnt much more about what that takes. So today we'll be hearing more about what we found through the pilot evaluation, which we hope you find helpful. And in terms of what this means for policy and how to achieve the systemic change that we're committed to, so the evaluation, as you'll hear, makes recommendations for change to create youth employment services and systems that would support career development for young people with disability. We're drawing on these evaluation lessons from the pilot, along with other insights into what should change and what some of the options are to develop policy recommendations. And we look forward to sharing these policy recommendations with you at a later point. So that's enough from me. Let me now hand over to our speakers. So Tracy Pahor and Sharon Bond, both of whom are Senior Evidence and Learning Officers at BSL, and they were two of the members of the IPE evaluation team. So over to both of you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sharon. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people. As Nicole mentioned, there's a disparity in the outcomes of young people transitioning from school to work. If you could just move the slide forward. Thank you. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare reports that only 49% of disabled 15 to 24-year-olds are employed, compared to 64% of non-disabled young people. And the literature indicates that there are low expectations for the careers of disabled young people, to the point where it's seemingly not considered that young people with significant disability, for example, those with intellectual disability, will have careers. And people are often transferred direct from school into adult disability services. So parents and supporters have described the experience of disabled young people leaving school as more of a cliff edge than a transition. One problem is the lack of inclusive and accessible career development opportunities, and this is a systems level challenge. Academics report that the current systems, schools, training, further education, social and employment services, just aren't designed to support the career transition of disabled young people. And while there's some support through the National Disability Insurance Scheme, Disability Employment Services and the Australian Disability Enterprises, these are often not youth specialists. Segregated workforces don't pay minimum wage. And the Royal Disability Commission has noted that separate services usually do not have access to the National Youth Employment Service called Transition to Work, and that service can't work with young people while they're still in school to ease those transitions. So on to the next slide. The change we want is that and these are long-term outcomes from our theory of change. The change we want is investment in young people with disability and recognition that they're valuable assets to the community, workforce and economy. And this investment and their inclusion will contribute to their economic security, social inclusion, recognition and dignity. For this to happen, systems need to work together to enable and empower young people so that they have career development opportunities in school, supporters in their families and networks, access to effective mainstream employment services, access to services and funding for effective supports, financial independence as they pursue and achieve open employment and inclusive workplaces. The Inclusive Pathways to Employment pilot was developed to work towards this change. It explored how mainstream youth employment services, in this case transition to work, can support young people to pursue their interests, aspirations and goals, and to be socially and economically included in their communities. So IPE was delivered in 4 regions around Australia. The Brotherhood of St Lawrence National Collaboration in Employment and Disability, or NCED, acted as an enabling organisation for the pilot, which ran from mid-2023 to the middle of this year. So on to the next slide. IP supported 3 streams of young people. So stream A received intensive support through the pilot and included young people with significant disability, such as NDIS participants, DSP recipients, and those receiving specialist support in school. Young people not normally included in TTW services. So there was 149 in Stream A. Their average age was 17 and almost half were still enrolled in school, so earlier in their career journeys. Males were overrepresented at 62%, 36% were NDIS participants, and the most common disabilities in Stream A were autism and or ADHD, with 65% of all Stream A having these forms of neurodivergence. So Stream B had disability and were already in TTW, but they received enhanced support through IPE. There were 428 Stream B participants. The average age was slightly older than Stream A at 20, and the most common disability category was psychosocial disabilities, with the most common being anxiety and depression. So Stream C refers to young people in school or the community who participated in career development activities developed by IP services and their student transition action networks. So 806 young people attended activities during IPE. Onto the next slide. So IPE included components to extend the work of youth employment services, and this included extending the accessibility of service locations and building young people's confidence in visiting service settings, as well as school and other community settings, using a key worker model to provide personalised coaching and tailor the 4-phase advantage thinking model to each participant. And this supports young people to achieve their aspirations through career exploration, work preparation, and skill learning and post-placement support. IP looked for ways to work with young people's family and other supporters. It developed the student transition action networks of local professionals and interest holders to address unmet needs through local projects. And the NCED team provided extensive training, reflection, and knowledge sharing. And in services, IP employed disability specialists as youth coaches and to build the capability of generalist staff. This was really important. So the evaluation examined how mainstream employment services provided by transition to work were adapted to support young people with disability. Given the complexity of the pilot with 3 streams, the evaluation focused primarily on Stream A, or young people with significant disability, followed by B and then C. We evaluated young people's career progress across broad life domains, as well as their education, training and employment achievements. Our focus was on what worked and what the services running the pilot learned, so that we could understand how employment services can better support young people with disability. So we obtained ethics approval for the evaluation and used a range of methods. Many people contributed information, IP participants, their families and supporters, staff in delivery partner organisations, staff at the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, National Disability Insurance Agency staff, and local employers. And we really want to thank everyone for sharing their reflection and insights. And a special thanks goes to the pilot sites for not only contributing information, but providing the logistical support so that all the information could be collected. And thanks also to the NSED staff who collaborated with us, and of course our funders. We're happy to be sharing back what we learned and the principles for more inclusive and accessible employment services so that this work can be taken forward. What did we find? Most Stream A and B participants took part in career exploration and early work preparation activities. But because they're at different points in their career journey and started IP at different times, their progress during the evaluation data period varied. So IP was valued by many staff as an opportunity to focus not only on the final education and employment outcomes that are funded in the TTW model, but also on young people's journey to outcomes. The evaluation shifted the focus from traditional performance measures by including broader indicators of progress across life domains and asking about young people's experience. Some staff in interviews highlighted IP's broader understanding of what progress looks like, which was important for working with young people earlier in their journey to employment. And the person quoted here talks about how counting broader outcomes shifted the mindset of staff in a system that's really focused on counting education and employment outcomes. It increased recognition of the 10 or so other things that are needed first before a young person gets a job. And they might seem small, but they're not for those involved. 84% of Stream A participants, just on the next slide, thanks, said IP helped them progress in their self-knowledge. 83% said it helped with their social connections and networks. 72% said it helped with their employability skills. And 38% with life skills. And the reason that this one is lower is because support with things like housing weren't goals for everyone. Okay, so importantly, Stream A participants said their job service had given them enough opportunities to work towards what they wanted in a job. 100% said that. 84% felt more hopeful about reaching education or training goals in the next 6 months, and 80% with getting a job in the next 6 months. Then on to the next slide. Some participants achieved education, training, or employment outcomes. So 36% of Stream A and 46% of Stream B. But many participants were still on the journey. And services told us that more achieved outcomes after the evaluation data collection period ended. The family member here is quoted talking about how they never thought they'd see their child working 5 days a week. It had been so hard to get them to school. They talked about the confidence that it gave them, the traineeship for their resume, and they expressed hope of what might come out of it. So I'll hand over to Tracy now to continue.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. I'm Tracy. Hopefully, someone feel free to interrupt if my sound isn't working too well. And I've got my brown hair clipped up and wearing a green cardigan and a brownish scarf, probably. I'm very glad to be here. I will also admit I'm not a regular Zoom user, so just do bear with us if anything's not going smoothly. We'll try and improve it. But what I'm more excited to talk about is during this evaluation, with the opportunity to hear from people what they thought the value of IP was. So what they felt was what their experience was, but also what they thought of it. And so what we've done in our report was we've sort of focused a lot on what we heard from participants in the pilots. This was Stream A participants. So I've got a few points I'm going to go through here. It was lovely, well, not lovely, it's actually important for the effectiveness, I think, that surveyed Stream A participants said their service was accessible and inclusive. So in that survey, we had 82% said that, agreed that the job service was easy for people with disability to use. and 96% said this job service thinks about what people need and makes things so everyone can join in. But of course, we know that this pilot was with certain communities and groups, and it's likely to get a positive response, but it's still lovely. And also I think it's important that we ask that question. And we also heard, talking to some of the, not just through the survey, but also the interviews, participants appreciated the environment with, these little things that we often hear about, services, snacks, friendly staff around, quieter or closed off area, and the option to attend on a quieter day or have the lights off. So we're starting to see here how the service probably needed to be a bit tailored, and it's about having options and putting those forward, which talk about more. Sorry, I try not to go too off script. Thank you. So they valued, so I think the service was engaging young people with disabilities. So young people valued that atmosphere, being able to meet their sensory needs, having tailored support in domains beyond employment. So that means things like having access to, somebody needed food vouchers, but the support that they felt was really for them. Obviously, coaches were key to this, and I'll mention here that the caseloads for IP Stream A were below what usually coaches or other workers in youth employment services, so the transition to work services have. But still, we heard from some participants they did want more time with their coach. And we know that there is only so many hours in a day, but also that staff turnover was also a challenge noted by some young people and staff. And creative and fun activities. And I think when young people described IP as being valuable because it offered fun activities, this can be understood not as an optional extra, but it was core to part of the inclusive practice that enabled young people to engage. And on this slide, and it's also, of course, in our report, there's a quote that's, and I'll just say they may, and so this participant said, they make things, sorry, I'm just getting some of the top ups, hopefully not getting that. They make different activities and stuff fun and enjoyable for me. I was very shy when I first started. As the coach said, I'm not as shy around my coach now because they make things enjoyable and not so anxious for me. So we see these different layers of things obviously coming together. And hopefully I can move forward. And as young people valued a supported transition from school. So I think Nicole opened with the importance of this as well. So getting to know the coach while still at school was important, being able to, because IP was able to start Stream A participants and while they were still in school, which isn't something that usually happens for youth employment services. Young people were able to develop plans for what was next, it reassured their family and other supporters too that they could move forward on this journey. Obviously, when young people are coming up to those transition points, there can be a lot of change for everybody in their lives as well as themselves, but also the being able to avoid that disconnection from being able to not have to wait for a period of disengagement, which is maybe a very system thing that people in the employment service system know about, but might not be as obvious to some of us. But we did have some young people that had taken a break and maybe even taken a break if they'd contacted IP, it started soon or at the same time. But and we just, what we heard in the interviews is it sounded like that was obviously a much harder journey to go on. And just before I move on, this slide that had the main points, I put the illustration from the front cover of the report on there, which was by one of the IP youth advisors, Chloe Summer. And it's got a brown pathway with pathways to success sort of lightly in it. It looks like it's going through quite a lovely forest, and it's got signposts as well along the way. Sorry, I have an unmuted thing that's popping up. And obviously opportunities for exploring careers. So that meant understanding of potential careers and finding a good fit. So sometimes this was through things like Careers Expo, which actually Careers Expos can actually be run in a lot of different ways. But also, young people got opportunities to talk with employers in other spaces too, going out, visits, obviously work experience, as well as coaches simply using their networks to find information. And young people really spoke positively about that and the opportunities they had. And I have this long quote on a slide, but for time, I might abridge it a little. But and this was a young person found out through trialing a job that the job wasn't for them, and they said, the employer said to them, "Oh, it's more of a work experience. Put me as a referee." So this young person moved forward without information about themselves, but also, obviously, we all know having referees is important too when you're trying to get a foot in employment. So I'll just see if I get this. And building up capability at the young person's pace. So young people got skills and qualifications. We heard a lot about building confidence, but we heard a lot too about this contrasting maybe with some of their other experiences, or being really helpful that it was what they were ready for. So this doesn't necessarily mean moving slowly, but it means working with the person. And just for time, I'll encourage you to read the report to hear more from the quotes from young people for that, because I'll move forward now. So I also have the opportunity today to take us through a little bit more. So we know that participants valued having access to the inclusive youth employment services. And now I'm going to talk through how IPE contributed to this. So this is what we stepped through in our report, but also the 4 principles for inclusive youth employment services. So what we're going to do is introduce what we think the IPE activities or contribution was, and then the related principle, to hopefully move through this in a way that leaves us some time for discussion, because Sharon and I are usually much more fans of hearing what you have to say than simply sharing it. But yes, if I get this working, that's great. Thanks. So the universal career support pathways. So IPE, and this is perhaps the easiest place to start when it comes to the contribution of IPE, is it offered new pathways for access to youth employment services. So there were 3 streams, as Sharon mentioned, and we don't expect you to memorise this, but each strengthened the ability of youth employment service to provide a career development pathway. And so there was a new pathway for participants in what we called streams A and C. So stream A provided access for young people who may not otherwise have had that access to youth employment services. And stream C extended career support development to young people with disability in the community. And this is including young people that weren't enrolled in IPE or transition to work. So in fact, that was the focus. So what this meant is, for example, a young person who did not join stream A because those around that young person thought this particular pilot wouldn't meet their needs and be a good experience for them, this young person could still participate in opportunities through stream C. So that was great. They could still have that access. And there was enhanced support, obviously, to be able to offer a service that might support stream A participants, but it was also being able to have that enhanced support for stream B was important, because we heard that many young people may enrol in transition to work youth employment services, but sometimes young people don't progress due to barriers. So in this way, it wasn't just about new pathways into the service, but also strengthening pathways through the transition process. And as I was, hopefully in my example before, indicated that, having there was a bit of flexibility in how people could access, and this did obviously create a lot of confusion, and hopefully we've taken you through it a bit clearer in our report. But it did take time for the services to implement this and find what worked for them. But importantly, this was able to be informed by the participant, their family members, and other supporters. So I think it just helps keep in mind when we're trying to do this work. It might be easy for those of us measuring things to have things really clear, but are we giving people access? So that gets us to our first principle of the 4, so build inclusive employment pathways. So hopefully for those of you interested in what can be scaled and what can we take forward, these principles will help with that. And so we recommend that career support is available for all young people with disability, and we think universal services can help reduce gaps, particularly if we develop integrated pathways like begin early, offer sustained support, and include the voices of young people with disability and those with lived experience in design and implementation. And it's worth stating, because it's not always the way things work. And we know that it's not necessarily because people don't want to see that happen, but we know that this requires broad systemic work. And we know that with young people in the pilot, many of them still being on their journey, we know this needs to start early and have that option for some sustained support. I think the next group of things that we think IP contributed to was the IP pilot emphasised aspirational goals and inclusive practice to support young people to work towards open employment. And the advantage thinking approach, which was central to IP, recognises that all young people have a vital contribution to make to the social and economic lives of our communities and society, and that all young people should have opportunities and networks that they can realise that through to facilitate their participation. So obviously services, especially in the youth space, need to bring this focus on aspiration. And there was also work on accessibility that was already being done in the services, but IP was also able to bring a focus on that, including in their environments and activities, and also working with family members was enabled with the professional development and facilitated access. We know that it's important to not treat individuals as autonomous islands, and families are obviously a big part of who we're connected to for many of us. So being part of IP helps start many conversations about disability and offer better support for young people, and staff said they're becoming more aware and more inclusive in the way they worked with all young people. And I included a quote on this slide that was actually from our interim report now, I think, and it was this staff member said that it was really good, and not just good for young people in IP, but the whole site, because obviously as well, you know, we all have access needs. Some of them might be taken more obviously than others, but also the gatekeeping. We know that some young people might have disability that's not disclosed or not diagnosed. So that was there. And sorry, we're going forward. And then we want to, so we think the principle here is to embed aspiration-focused and inclusive practice. I think it's probably quite obvious to many people that this sounds like an important way to work, and we think some of the recommendations for that are around investing in young people with opportunities, valuing aspiration, using a broad concept of progress. Of course, we need to have inclusive and accessible settings, and we think that offering individualised coaching as well as group activities were both helpful to realise the inclusive approaches, being able to tailor things, but also having things that help people share with peers and build up networks to see what's possible, and provide coordinated support. So obviously you're not going to have a service that's inclusive if people cannot access it, and part of people's access needs will include having other supports. So then the next group of things in terms of IP's contribution was obviously talking about integrating supports, collaboration, and in IP in the design, we found that collaboration was integrated in pathways and practice in terms of what needed to happen. So we had some very overt collaboration through local networks and establishing student transition action networks. So it's a major piece of work. This included working with schools and other sectors to reach young people and provide the supports for them, but also to build that in the community and reach out. And then one of the little ways that this sort of work shows through is it really does, it's important for securing opportunities, and it could be in some ways going out in the community and finding those, but also, you know, that collaboration piece was able to have a little workaround for something that for many in youth employment services is an ongoing challenge, which is organising work experience. So obviously for participants who are still at school, schools have arrangements in terms of the insurances and how you can do that. So being able to work and get that through while people still had those opportunities and being able to work like that. So it's not just around these pathways needing to be different parts coming together, but also the in the practice, because we all know that there'll be always lots of problems to solve. So I think the employers' collaboration piece is also always a challenge that needs to be taken on in these spaces. And so we saw bringing employers in and to be able to offer the opportunities, because we know youth employment in general in the community is somewhere where we can see struggle to get the movement we need. And one employer that we spoke to spoke about how they'd done an apprenticeship and they wanted to give other young people the opportunity to. So I'll just quote that. And they said that this coach was great. So now I ring when I need someone, which is so good from a business point of view. The coach takes it through with them first and gets their confidence for me to interview. Then, of course, it's up to me. So this employer was, in quite a traditional sense, using the pilot was a place where recruitment happened for their business, which obviously helped them meet their business needs, but also making sure that young people could have a good experience of that initial recruitment process. So it's probably not a surprise that our third principle is to include cross-system collaboration in pathways and practice. So we've got some very specific recommendations here in terms of this pilot showing integrating schools, employment services, training and other supports, starting employment service support in schools, but also we need to support inclusive workplaces and make study accessible so people have options on their pathway. There's information and support for navigation, offering community spaces and activities. So sometimes we know there's not always a lot in every area, or it might not be affordable. And so with the affordability to the funds for opportunities and supports, and we know NDIS can be a bit you're in or you're out. So in terms of what you can get access through to that, so and I know that transition to work and other services often find having flexible brokerage really important. Facilitating the long-term networks to this collaboration. So this is something that we see is a perpetual challenge, and in part the providing resources for sustained networks is to try and help make that long-term network possible. And so that diagram just had, I like to put the collaboration in a bit of a triangle with the pathways and the practice, because we know they all interrelated. And then part of what was offered in IPE was, extending youth employment services capability. So one of the key expansions would have been in simply having funding to deliver the IPE pilot. Staff and delivery partner services had some funds to employ some, usually 2 extra staff. So, and they employed people with disability specialist knowledge and experience. So this, of course, means that there's someone there for the coaching and inclusive activities for young people, but it's also not just in terms of those staff needed to do that, but also having the staff with the expertise, those extra ideas and the support they were able to give staff for that, and staff case reviews and reflective team activities with some spaces, obviously helping with identify and plan for staff training too. All this takes people time, but also the knowledge. And delivery partner organisations also needed to have or develop leadership support. Obviously the conducive organisation policies and procedures, as well as staff duties and other staff guidance. So we know that in places where they try to make change with staff turnover and different priorities, sometimes it'd be quite easy to get staff on board with doing some of the work, but when they could see the difference, but if you get new staff, does that mean that you have to start again, or is it sort of built in what's there? And of course, collaboration across parts of the organisation, including with internal communications teams, which is probably not something I would have thought of as much until we saw, but we saw a lot of reflection on that, and also youth advisory groups, which there were where they existed. So, and then this is still continuing in terms of what was being offered. Underpinning the pilot was Brotherhood of St. Lawrence National Collaboration on Employment and Disability was to function as an enabling organisation. So they provided a model with practices and tools. Maybe model is too clear a word, but there was certainly guidance around and information and support. There were forums for addressing challenges and finding what works. And in fact, a lot of the guidance was developed in response to identifying the challenges and successes. And obviously the delivery partner services were core to not only trialling it and feeding that back, but also contributing to that information, I think. And there's also oversight for accountability, because we know that how do you make a pilot happen and how things. So that brings us to our fourth principle, is to enable the pathways, practice and collaboration. You need to invest in capability development for to invest in capability development for youth employment services and their staff. So I think in this pilot, we've seen what positive changes can be realised in what we're offering young people. And you need to ensure organisational support within the youth employment service. And also we think perhaps resourcing and enabling organisation with the relevant professional expertise to coordinate the work and build capability is a way to move this forward. And we know that the youth employment services will need to have resourcing to build their staff capability by employing staff with expertise to support young people with disability. And I think we provide some notes in there that doesn't necessarily mean those staff need to do that work. Eventually, we'd like to see all staff increasingly working in more inclusive ways, but ensuring there's always someone in the team with an eye on that would probably be helpful. But general things around retention, transition, embedding inclusive practice, limiting caseload and group size, and fostering professional development and network building. And we know that the investment matters, but also just keeping it there to make sure we can keep it on the agenda. So this last one is just the full put together on one slide, but I will just move forward. Obviously, we can put this up again during discussion time if anyone would find that to be helpful. So I think, but IP was able to make investments in more inclusive youth employment services, and hopefully our 4 principles summarised here today are ways we can create more inclusive youth employment services for young people with disabilities. So that might have moved forward. So that gives me into our part that I'm actually most interested in. So just before we get there and the discussion and any questions, we'll just let this forward. So obviously you can find out more. So we have the final evaluation report is publicly released. And so on this slide, there's just the reference with the URL, and you'll find on that side the full report and the evaluation at a glance summary. And so we've got a lovely picture of the thing, but also to make note that there'll be a policy report later in terms of this is just part of taking that work forward. And to now bring us to the questions and reflection, and hopefully now it's over to you for your questions and reflections. And in particular, we invite about what you've learned from IPE and the implications for your work going forward. Might be in terms of your practice, program design, policy, or advocacy, depending on your role. And I'm going to stop sharing now, hopefully. And I'm going to mute myself for a moment and take a glass of water.
Adriano and Amy did, and Annalee, I know that we have you on the line. Sorry, it's Amy Fabry-Jenkins from BSL speaking. I'm a woman in my mid-30s wearing a very optimistically spring dress. Amy, we have Amy, D'Emanuel, Adriano, and Annalee who are working on the project. Did you have things that you wanted to add, or shall I throw straight to the questions that we've had in the chat?
Thanks, Amy. I might just jump in there and go first. My name's Adriano. I come to you from Bunurong country, from my lovely house. I wear a clear frame glasses, a short trim beard. I have long brown hair tied in a ponytail, and I am wearing my BSL hoodie, which is comfortable and warm and not spring-like at all. So just in speaking to some of the learnings, I just want to touch on the note from NCD and what we're doing internally here at BSL with our own youth and adult transition programs working in the employment space, and just quickly note on how we are embedding the learnings and carrying on this work that has been developed in IP as part of the pilot in terms of what we have seen to know that works and best practice. And those principles moving forward really becoming a focus on the work as we go forward, making sure we're providing an inclusive space for all people that come through our doors, because this inclusive approach benefits not just those with diagnosed disabilities, but all people that work through the door. And some of the quick things that we've been able to implement at the start of this pilot that we reflected internally in our own programs were simple things such as accessible forms and tools to use with participants coming through, providing training and upskilling to the staff to understand how to talk confidently about disability and how to support and what mechanisms they can tap into in terms of existing support networks, how we can bring families on board, what are the different streams of funding that we can blend and braid to fully wrap around and support a young person. So engaging with NDIS, DES, job access, accessible supports within the TAFE system, school systems. So it became a real focus on building capacity of our own staff to do these things and sort of bring us all on that inclusion journey. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks. I'll pass over to somebody who want to jump in next.
Hi everyone, my name's Emily Griffin. I was the Inclusive Pathways to Employment Coordinator. I have my hair tied back in a ponytail and I'm wearing, also like Adriana, not a spring friendly, not a very optimistically spring jumper. I just want to say in regards to all of those principles, which are incredible, you know, building inclusive employment pathways, embedding aspiration-focused and inclusive practices, cross-system collaboration, and then that capability development and staff. If you're thinking about how to apply these in your work or how you can take forward these learnings, there is incredible practices and approaches and training that allow all of the above to happen. It's inclusive and accessible practice. It's learning how to understand and engage and plan with young people with disability. It's coaching approaches, it's constructive engagement with family, it's customized employment, image-assisted planning, systematic instruction, advantage thinking. And that sounds like a lot, but there's so much access to those resources and training. There's a lot of free access to those. And if you're able to integrate some of that into your practice with your coaches or, again, support workers, family members, there's training customized to family members online for free. And then create spaces for reflection and celebrating what's working in practice, you'll go a long way in being able to support young people with disability into employment. There's a lot of fancy names for that training, but really it's getting to the base of understanding hands-on experience, engaging supporters, high beliefs, and really simple strategies that are really, really effective. So yeah, I really want people to take away that knowledge and know that while it can sound complex, there's really simple strategies to support young people into employment and education and training, and high belief plays a big part in that, and awareness of those resources plays a huge part in that as well. Stop yapping now. Thanks.
Thanks. That's great. And I think that some of the points that are coming up in the chat, hopefully you can see that. I think there was mention of whether support workers and what can you do. And I think, yeah, everyone should be building up capability and in the community. And we probably didn't I probably didn't speak clearly to that, in that I don't think this is just something that support workers or employment services need to do. I think it's something that all of us, we all are colleagues, we're all employers, we're all people ourselves, and we're all friends. So yeah, and I think that might talk to a little in terms of some of the other things coming through. So thanks. And I'll just pause a moment because my non-Zoom familiarity means I'm not quite. Was somebody else waiting to follow up from Anna-Marie?
Amy, Amy D'Emanuel, did you have anything to add?
I guess 2 quick points I'd love to throw to the questions, but really quickly, firstly, is we heard 2 really clear messages again and again and again. And one is that you're going to be working with people with disability if you're working in employment services. If you look at the statistics of numbers of people with particularly neurodiversities in the younger age groups coming through over the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to be there. So we need to understand how we can work effectively with them. And the second clear one is that it's actually not that hard. Yes, there is lots of things to learn and lots of ways that we can learn to engage differently, but the most important at the root of it is just asking people what works for them. What are you interested in? What makes life more helpful for you? And where can you be successful? And then we just need to consider that as we go through all of the rest of the steps. And so we did, once people kind of got that in our services, at the people working with the young people in the program, it became simpler because it's really just about getting to know the person that you're working with. And that and then again and again we heard about how, well, that's not just for people with disability. It allows us to do really effective work with anybody who's experiencing barriers to employment. It strengthens how you can do your work. Yeah, just ask people what works for them, I guess, is my main argument there.
Thank you, Amy. When we've got Amy Fabry-Jenkins speaking again, a real need for visual descriptions in this team when there are were 4 Amy's at one point. We've got a question in advance. Feel free to keep sending them in the chat for the time that remains. But one that came through loud and clear was, is the approach scalable and replicable? Can be replicated. Replicable, yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Jumpy. So it's just Tracy again, and Sharon, feel free to jump in if there's anything. So hopefully by setting out the 4 principles, we help think about, well, what are the things that can be applied to work in an effective way more broadly. In terms of, if you think about this, some of this has to happen at scale. So in terms of moving out, especially some of the pathways, if services are going to work together, but also parts of the community, obviously there are systemic elements to how schools and how employment services are contracted to run and how that relates to each other. There's also the smaller things that can start off probably without that, and we see some of it happening anyway, especially through the collaboration. So, and the other side, obviously the practice, these are things that I think, as Amy Di Emanuele just mentioned, we're all needing to apply this in our work all the time. So I think it could probably go everywhere. And hopefully, do we need to do this everywhere? Hopefully not, increasingly, as this is just the way that things work in terms of a pilot with a service that's helping and supporting agencies. But yeah, we certainly want to see these pathways, the practices, the collaboration, and then what's enabled for everyone to be doing this all the time. I think, yes, we'd like to see this scaled and replicated, but increasingly as built in. And I think that, just to dovetail on that, one of the questions that came through earlier was around the age, whether this works for people and other age groups, and I think that we'd see that too. But I think one of the unique opportunities we have at this younger age group is that opportunity to build these pathways, to have school part of that, because otherwise you do have that drop off. And yeah, so that's certainly a efficiency if you are looking at cost benefit and those types of causes for action. So I'll just pause for a moment there before formally handing to Sharon.
Tracy. We've just got one more question before we throw to Sharon. There's several questions of the same vein, essentially around how to get employers on board and what strategies do you use to engage employers. Amy and Anna-Marie, do you have something to say?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a few things to keep in mind when getting employers on board. And at first, it's the mission of the project, which is we're looking for secure, meaningful, and decent work, which means we're engaging employers in open employment settings with at least minimum wage. And in doing that, a lot of the sites used elements of customized employment. So that's looking at the conditions and interests of a young person with disability, figuring out who they are, what they need to succeed in the workplace, and then recognizing the business value that they have for an employer and making that match based on the conditions, interests, and value of that young person and how it matches with the business. Our coaches went out and approached employers individually based on the young people. They built really positive working relationships with those employers who could see the value in the young people that they were hiring. A lot did like workplace tours, workplace employer expos. It was basically getting employers on board that shared that same mission and vision, but also understanding what that young person needed to succeed in the workplace so that you're able to make that really meaningful match and think about how to sustain that employment match after that young person is there. We talk about not placing and praying, which is just hoping for the best and being really considered and understanding what that young person needs in employment and then working directly with that employer. There's also things like post-placement support, access to job access, but it was really thoughtful employer engagement, and we can send some links on what that looked like. Anything else to add there, Amy?
So this is Amy D, and I forgot to give my visual description before. I apologize. I have short curly hair, wear glasses, and I'm wearing a teal top. I think it was really interesting. Employers is always what comes up as being the difficult step, and people often put the blame on employers not being interested in engaging. I think we need to come at this piece of work really positively. Actually, our employers want people to work that are well matched to the job and that are going to stay there for a long time and be productive. So if we can present young people to them who are really keenly interested in working in the job that is on offer, and present that young person for all that they are capable of, I think employers may sometimes fear the risk of employing somebody with disability, and we can support them through that by understanding how to support the person through understanding their conditions for success, is what it's called within customised employment. So it's about understanding a young person who, how do they best receive instruction? So I'm going to work really well if you can give me a to-do list at the beginning of the day and check in with me a couple of times throughout the day. So as we support young people through all sorts of opportunities to experience the work world, we help them to build an understanding of themselves and what works well for them in the workplace. And then we support them to be able to communicate that to employers. And that builds really strong relationships that last.
Thank you, Amy. I think that's a perfect point to throw to Sharon for a final reflection. And thank you all so much for attending this full hour. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, look, thank you so much, everyone, for coming today, especially those from IP Pilot Services, our funders and NSED staff. The full report, as mentioned, is on the BSL website, and we're going to send an email with today's slides and the recording a bit later. And then later on this year, there will be a policy report available as well. So thanks and have a great afternoon. Bye.